Finally, we have the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and this is probably the most common staff agency that you'll hear recognized. They advise Congress on likely economic effects of different spending programs. They provide information on the cost of proposed policies. The Congressional Budget Office weighed in on healthcare. Of course, it would depend on who you talk to, they think the Congressional Budget Office said, but that's going to be, by and large, what are going to be the economic effects of this particular law. And that brings to a close our staff organization and our organization piece of this review. We're now moving away from organization to talk about how a bill becomes a law. I am not going to give you a full and comprehensive review of that. I'm just going to review a couple of the key terms that I want you to know. I would remind you to look back at your chart in the book. It's pretty decent. Also, look back over your legislative process, your legislative web quest. Look at the answers that you turned in. Skim back through different parts of that. That would be a great review on how a bill becomes a law. And hopefully it will remind you why there is a piggy sticking out of this bill. The first term we're going to talk about is multiple referrals. Committees will fragment different bills that are extremely complex, which are a number of the bills. Bills can now be referred to several committees simultaneously to be considered in whole or in part. Today, we see that frequently it's done sequentially, moving from one committee to another. Or in the House, what they'll do is they'll assign distinct portions of a bill to different committees. The next term is discharge petition. Keep in mind that most bills will die in committee. In order to keep a bill alive, they will, if a bill is stalled at committee level, they'll issue a discharge petition. This brings the bill to the floor for immediate consideration. A discharge petition must be signed by 218 members of the House. In the Senate, any member can move a discharge petition. We mentioned how powerful the Rules Committee is. They can offer two different types of rules. Closed rule is when there are limitations on the amount of debate time. There would be limitations on amendments. Those are all examples of closed rules, and they would be imposed by the Rules Committee in the House of Representatives. An open rule permits amendments from the floor on a particular piece of legislation, and again, that would be an open rule that would come from the Rules Committee in the House. You also have restrictive rules, which would permit some amendments but not others. Quorum is a minimum number of representatives required to be in attendance to conduct official business. Quorum call is calling the roll in the House or the Senate to see if there are enough people present. Cloture, which we've already mentioned, is present only in the Senate because it is designed to stop a filibuster. It needs to be signed by 60 members to end debate on a bill in order to end the debate, to stop the filibuster, to stop the guy from talking. I'm sure some of you wish that you could invoke the cloture rule right now on me. Sorry. The next one we want to talk about is double tracking. It's also related to a filibuster. It keeps the Senate conducting business during a filibuster. Essentially, the disputed bill is temporarily shelved so that the Senate can go on with other business. A voice vote is a method used in both houses. Essentially, people shout out yay or nay. Think about when I ask you if you want to keep the lights on or off. That's a voice vote. You guys just yell. A division vote is also known as a standing vote. It occurs in both houses, and it is where members stand and are counted in order to see which side wins. A teller vote is used only in the House. Members pass between two tells, first the yeas and then the nays. And then you have a roll call vote, which is used in both houses. They answer yay or nay when their names are called. We've talked about how Congress is organized, and we also have talked about how a bill becomes a law. And now we want to talk briefly about power and ethics in Congress. There are concerns about Congress. As you know, Congress is not exactly a beloved branch. One of the questions that Congress is faced with is it there to refine public opinion or to mirror it? James Madison thought that national laws should transcend local interest and also to make reasonable compromises among competing societal interests. The legislatures were not supposed to be captured by special interests. In other words, there wasn't supposed to be one group that could impose its will on the legislative branch. There is some irony in this because interest groups usually represent a significant portion of public interest. So we are always talking negatively about interest groups and special interests, and you'll hear that word tossed out negatively. But the irony is that oftentimes those special interests are our own special interests. In any case, this ongoing debate between interest groups and the legislative branch debating often results in policy gridlock. Mind you that the framers very intentionally set up Congress to act deliberatively, and yet many Americans see Congress as not acting, when in reality it's just acting very deliberatively and thinking. Another concern about Congress has been term limits, that we have seen an increase in the number of incumbents who continue to be reelected and become career politicians. Many people favor term limits because they see career politicians as being out of touch with public interest. Again, a certain degree of irony here. We're worried about people being elected too much, yet we continue to elect the same people. Oy vey. The Supreme Court ruled that term limits are unconstitutional, by and large, because they're limiting people's choice, limiting people's freedom of speech. Term limits in some ways force amateurs who are less prone to compromise and more likely to be influenced by lobbyists into Congress, which could also impede progress, going back to that idea of policy gridlock. There have been other limits placed on Congress, such as reducing the number of perks for congressmen and really drawing attention to the idea of pork and trying to limit the amount of pork that members of Congress put into a particular bill. Finally, we have the ethics of legislators, which are still questioned. There have been a series of reforms to try to tighten up the rules to enforce ethics upon the legislators. That would include financial disclosure. However, that assumes that money is the only source of corruption. Corruption could also come from bargaining, favors among members of Congress and presidents, offering jobs after someone is in Congress, and in order to stop the latter, one of the rules that has been enforced is that there's essentially a cooling off period when you transition from being a public figure into being in the private sector. Let's say that a member of Congress retires from that and goes to work for a lobbying firm. There would be a cooling off period before they would actually go back to lobby members of Congress. Which brings us to the end of our discussion of Congress. Bravo, this has been a lengthy discussion. Keep in mind, okay, I'm back. Obviously, I still have a landline. You'll have to excuse me. I think where I left off was this discussion of this was a very long review session. Thanks for hanging in with me, guys. And also just as a reminder that the Constitution lays out Congress first and foremost in the First Amendment, in the first article, which is also the longest article. So good work, well deserved, nice job.